So Parashat Vayeshev this week is a one of the most special parashot because it talks about a one of the most dramatic, if not the most dramatic, situation that occurred to the Jewish people. But the irony is that it happens in a parasha that all we want to hear or do is to just be quiet and sit and relax. The word Vayeshev means and he sat. And the context is that Jacob returns to the land after his exile of 20 years, and he was all he wanted to do is to sit and be quiet, but that doesn't happen. And the Talmud says that when he wanted to sit down and be quiet, kafats alav rugzo shel Yosef, the anger of Joseph jumped at him, and he, instead of sitting quietly and being relaxed, it is the most drama is occurring now. And what happens? Joseph, his beloved son, is clearly from the text. It says that he loved Joseph more than any of his children, which is mistake number one. Um, Even if you prefer one child over the other, you shouldn't be that overt about it because sibling rivalry is the essence of all problems with humanity. And if we want to learn about it, if we want to know about it, we always have to go back to Genesis. And the first siblings in the that are described in the Torah, in the Bible, are Cain and Abel. And that is the first issue. There's jealousy between them, and one kills the other. And actually, the model of Cain and Abel repeats here. Why? Because what happens, Joseph has a dream. Joseph is a dreamer, and dreams are very good. It's very good to dream. People who don't dream are, I guess, missing the human essence of trying to reflect and to prepare and to see the future. I'm not sure animals do that. I don't know. I'm not in their mind, but
Yes, they do. Yes,
for
they do.
I'm not
They
sure
do.
they can see the future or dream about maybe they can dream about a bone or dream about their food, but I'm not sure they can really dream about preparing for the next world or being a more just society. I'm not sure about that, but definitely this is a human trait. This is something that humans are endowed with, and they can see the future, can dream. And Joseph, of course, he's one of the prophets, and he comes to his brothers, and of course, he had to learn some lessons, of course, too, in etiquette. He tells them the dream, and he tells them that in his dream, um, he saw that they were all out in the field, and they were gathering sheaves, and his sheaf was in the center, and they were all their sheaves were bowing down to his. So, of course, as a metaphor, they saw it immediately as him seeing them bowing down to him. So that really didn't help the relationship that was already tense. And then he has another dream, and he dreams about a the stars and the luminaries in the sky, the sun and the moon, and 11 stars. So 11, of course, these are his brothers. He has 11 brothers. He's the 12, and the moon and the sun are his father and mother. And he tells them that too, that they will bow down to him. So that really makes them angry. And at this point, his father rebukes him too. And he says, how can you say that it's one thing to say that your brothers are going to bow down to you, but that your mother and I will bow down to you? That is definitely crossing the line. So, um, so how do we see the connection actually with between the sibling rivalry here? In Cain and Abel, that model of Cain and Abel was the jealousy, but it was also about the battle between the shepherd and the farmer, right? Because one of them, Cain, was the landowner, and Abel was the hevel. He was the breath. He was the livestock. He dealt with the sheep. So he was a shepherd. Here too, we have the model of the those who work the land and the shepherd. His brothers were all shepherds. And then later on, he goes and he has to visit them when his father sends him to go and see how they're doing with the flocks. But he actually has a dream about the land, about being a farmer. And we know that later on, when he's sold to Egypt and he becomes the viceroy of Egypt, he deals with exactly that. He deals with the farming to grow the wheat and to store it. And he becomes the master farmer. So there's something about the difference between the land and being a shepherd. And that, in a sense, is the tension here. And what exactly is the tension? The tension is that if you are a shepherd, you roam the land. You're not attached in you are using the land, of course. You live off the land, but you're not of the land. You are detached from it. So you are more of you roam. But if you work the land, of course you attach to the land and you live by the land, and this is a whole different mindset. Just as a side note, or maybe not even as a side note, but when you are a land worker, you really have to devote your whole life and your whole thought process. You're totally immersed in the work of the land because you have to toil, you have to pray for rain, you have to grow it, you have to mow, you have to harvest. You have to always be, your mind is always occupied with the land. But when you're a shepherd, you have a lot of extra time. And many people who are the shepherd, like Moses, like Saul, like other characters that became leaders of the Jews, they were shepherds first. First, because of course they take care of the animals and the living, but also because they have a lot of time to think and to master their mind. So that is a kind of the tension here. So, but of course, when you're the landowner, you are more, of course, prominent in that sense. So he tells them the stories, the his dreams, and it says that Joseph, when after he told them the dreams, they hated him so much that they couldn't even say hello to him. So think of someone that you can't even stand looking at. And if you see them, you cross you cross the road and you don't want to even to say hello. So they got to this situation where they really were in such tension. And then his father, probably trying to kind of make peace between the siblings, sends him to where they were. And he said, why don't you go and see how they're doing in Dotan in when they are shepherding? And he goes there, and of course he's taking a risk. His father is taking a risk because he knows their feelings towards their brother, but he sends them there, and he hopes for the best. But instead of the best, the worst happened, and they see him from afar. And when it says that they saw him from afar when he was approaching, the interpretation is that not only physically did they see him from afar, but they saw him from afar emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and so forth. So they didn't have that connection, that close connection with him. So, but on the other hand, when he goes and he tries to find them on the way, he runs into someone and he asks for directions. They didn't have GPS at the time, and he asked for directions, and he asked if he, he's going to Dotan, and the person that he ran into asks him, "What are you looking for? Are you looking for a place, a person? What are you looking for?" And of course, it's a setup to for Joseph to say, "I am looking for my brothers," and that's the most beautiful phrase in the Torah. I am looking for my brothers, and really, this is a special parasha and a special teaching because this is where we we deal with the best and the worst at one time. The best is what we want, what the Torah is all about, is looking for our brothers, looking for uh, our family, being together, being in camaraderie. And the worst is that they ended up selling him. They wanted to kill him, but Simeon said, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into the pit. And then he wanted to save him later. But then Judah later on says, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites that were going to Egypt. And let's see then what happens with him. And they said, let's throw him into the pit and see what comes out now of his dreams. So this is a very, very theological parasha. It's a very theological story because what it's telling us is that no matter what we do and how we try to trip each other, maybe we are making each other's journey longer. But if God has something in store for you, it'll happen. It may happen in a circuitous way because somebody tripped you or you tripped yourself in some way. You didn't control your emotions. You didn't control your inclinations. But one way or another, God knows us better than we know ourselves, and God knows us from the womb or even before we were conceived. So he knows where we are going and what we're going to do. So in this case, they threw him into the pit, and they said, now let's see what's going to happen with his dreams. And eventually, of course, his dreams do come true, and they end up bowing to him as the deputy of Pharaoh in Egypt. So they sell Joseph, and the haftarah for this for today is Amos. We read Amos, who said that God is willing to forgive us for almost anything we do. It says for three things God will forgive us, but for the fourth thing, God is not going to forgive us. And what is the fourth thing? That we sold a poor person for a pair of shoes, meaning for nothing. They sold Joseph for, it says, 20 shekels. So I'm sure 20 shekels was uh, significant enough, but definitely when it comes to the value of someone's life, it was definitely like a pair of shoes in comparison. So they sell him, and the phrase that somebody sold somebody or threw him under the bus, but selling someone. So literally, we used to sell people literally, of course, with slavery and other ways. Here they literally sell him. And of course, going down to Egypt as a slave, they knew that they will never see him again, or at least thought that they will never see him again. But then, so the story in this week is divided to three parts. That story first, then we have kind of the screen moves to Judah, to a story with Judah. And the story with Judah is that and then it comes back to Joseph after the story of Judah in the middle, which is a very interesting kind of breaking down the flow. But there's something about the story of Judah that we have to understand that is also linked to the selling of Joseph. And the Talmud says that because Judah did not prevent his brothers from selling Joseph. They told him, "You should have told us not to sell him and to bring him back to our father. We would have listened to you. You are the leader, and we would have listened to you. But you said sell him." And then they had to pretend that Joseph was devoured by an animal, by a wild beast. So they dip uh, his tunic with blood, and they bring it back to the father, to Jacob, and they said, "Recognize this tunic of your son." And of course, in basic theology, theology 101 is always about measure for measure. That's the basic idea of the theology in the Torah, that there's measure for measure. What you do comes back to you. So what is it? What did Jacob do so horribly that now he has to recognize his, so to speak, slaughtered son's tunic? But if you think of what happened in the last couple of parashot, when Jacob himself pretends with the clothing of his brother, and he cheats his own father. And he says to his father, "Recognize me as Jacob while he was, as Esau while he was Jacob." So there's a one-to-one here in all these stories. So now he has to recognize the tunic, and he said, "My son Joseph was devoured by a wild animal, and I am going to die in mourning." and it says his sons and his daughters were trying to comfort him, to console him, and nothing helped. So the whole time that Joseph was missing, right, or his father thought he was dead, he was in mourning. So it was about 22 years because they reunite after 22 years. So he was refused to be consoled, and then when the brothers see what happened to the father, to their father, they blamed Judah for not being more forceful with them at the time and telling them to bring him back to the father. So the story of Judah now, right after Joseph goes down to Egypt, sold as a slave, it cuts to Judah because he is now. It says that he went down from his brothers. Vayered me'echav. He went down somehow. So in every time the word going down in the Torah, it's always in a negative connotation. What we do is we go down to Egypt. So we go down spiritually. We go down somehow in status and stature and so forth. So he goes down, and the Talmud explains that because they no longer saw him as their leader because he made such a grave mistake. So he goes to somewhere else and he marries a woman in a different place, and he has three sons. And his three sons, he marries the first son to a woman named Tamar, and his first son somehow sins to God. He doesn't want to have children. He spills his seed, and God kills him. And then in a Levirate marriage, they have to the brother has to redeem the name of his dead brother who died without children. And the first child that comes out of this marriage belongs to the dead brother, is named as his son. So the brother who marries the widow, his brother's widow, somehow didn't want to do that either. Didn't want to have children with her, and he spills his seed too, and God kills him as well. And then at this point, Judah is afraid to give the third son to Tamar because he's afraid that somehow he'll end up dead as well. So he tells Tamar, "Go home to your father, and when he grows up, I'll call you and you can be with him." But he had no intention of doing that, and so he fools her, right? And so she goes home, and many few years go by, and of course her biological clock is ticking, and she wants to have children, and she realizes Judah does not have any intention of fulfilling this promise, but also she is committed to the family, so she cannot be with anybody else until either she is she would marry the third son, or she would be released from the family through the act of chalitza, releasing the taking off the shoe. So she pretends to be a harlot, and at that point, Judah's wife had died. So he goes down to with his flock, with the sheep, and he sees her on the road, and she had her face covered, so he didn't recognize her, but he thought she was a harlot, and he sleeps with her. But she demands beforehand, instead of he didn't have money on him, didn't have his credit card. So he has to leave something with her. And she asks for his signature, an IOU, so to speak, that she can redeem later. And he leaves her his staff, his ring, and his stamp. So she has all these three things, and he said, "I'll send someone tomorrow to bring you a sheep as a payment." And he sends the next day, and she's not there, of course, and she goes home. And then 3 months later, Judah is told that Tamar is pregnant, which means that she was with somebody else. So it's the same as being having relations outside of the marriage. So Judah said, "Okay, it's punishable by death. So go and put her on the stake and burn her." And beforehand, she sends those three items that he left with her. She didn't want to say publicly, "He is the one that I slept with." But she sends him those items that he left with her, the staff, the ring, and the stamp. And she says, "I slept with the man whom these items belong to." And of course, he recognized them immediately. And he says something that the rabbis tell us that because of this phrase, he justifies being the leader of Israel. His name is Judah, which of course it means to thank God, which is absolutely the essence of what we're here for, to recognize God and to thank God. But also, it in Hebrew it means to admit. Lehodot means to admit. So he admits he has the ability to admit his mistakes and to do tshuva. And a few weeks ago, we spoke about how Jacob symbolizes the moon, and Esau was the sun. But the moon has those coming back phases, right? The disappearing and the returning, and that's part of the idea of tshuva, coming back or repenting. So Judah has the same quality that he can repent, he can return, he can do tshuva. So the phrase that he uses is tzadka mimeni. Two words. She is more righteous than I am. Meaning she knew that I'm obligated to give her the third son or release her, one or the other. But I couldn't leave her chained. And this is, for me, one of the if not the worst thing in Judaism today, that we still have that idea of the chained women that their husband, for one reason or another, either not giving them the get, the divorce document, because they don't want to, or because they are incapacitated, or they just disappeared, or they're somehow we don't know where they are, and but they go to war and they die, but we don't know where they're buried. So there is and we have not come up with a really reasonable time frame when we say that's fine beyond a year two if the husband doesn't show up, because the husband has responsibilities too, to support his wife, to be with his wife, to do all these things. And if the husband does not fulfill his obligation on his side, why should the woman remain chained? So that is really the most unfortunate, I think, in Judaism today. So even then, back then, if we just learned from Judah, he said, Tzadkami Meni, she's more righteous. She understood that after a certain amount of time, either I release her or I have to provide for her. So, of course, she is released and she gives birth. She gives birth to twins, and then, of course, we know that those one of the twins, Peretz, who comes out first, he is the great great grandfather of King David and the Messiah, the Messianic time. So it's very interesting that the Messianic times and the Messiah and the concept of that sometimes comes from very unfortunate circumstances, but somehow it's born and it's here, and then it develops. So that's the second story of our parasha. And then it comes back to Joseph in Egypt, and to now Joseph is serving. He was sold to one of the highest ministers of Pharaoh, and he serves his house. And there's another beautiful, beautiful phrase that we use a lot in Hebrew, that Joseph was ish matzliach. He was a successful person. That everything he did, God succeeded in his hand. So no matter where he was, threw him into the pit. Literally, he was thrown into a pit. And then he was sold, and then he was sold into the highest minister of Pharaoh. And in his household, he became the chief of staff, the manager of everything. It said that Potiphar gave him the keys to everything, and whatever Joseph said was everybody had to go by that. But there was one exception, of course, that his wife, Potiphar's wife, was out of the question. However, Potiphar's wife really took a liking to Joseph and tried to seduce him over and over and over, to come to her side, to sleep with her, to be with her. And Joseph said, I cannot betray the trust that my master, your husband, is entrusting in me. He gave me everything besides the bread that he eats. And that's a phrase that the Talmud says it was a clean language to say the bread. As we know, it's not the Christian idea of the bread as the body and the wine as the blood. Of course, comes from Judaism, and this is where it comes from, where Joseph says, the only thing that is out of my limit is the bread that my master eats. And that is referring to, of course, his wife, the body of his wife. So, but she's relentless. And one day he came to the house and there was nobody there. And she literally came onto him and grabbed him by his tunic again. Again, that tunic, that clothing that keeps betraying. And the word for betraying in Hebrew is begidah, which is the same word as clothing, as beged, that started already in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve betrayed God and then had to wear the clothing. So he leaves the clothing in her hand and he runs out. So he's able, the rabbis tell us that he is called Joseph the Righteous because he was able to overcome such strong temptation. Think about, he is pursued by the probably the most wealthy, strongest woman besides maybe Pharaoh's wife in all Egypt. And he could easily succumb to that, but he doesn't. And the Talmud says that every time he wanted to do that, his father's face came. He saw his father's face. meaning the awe, the honoring your parents, not to shame the family or the your parents that they raised somebody who would be willing to do something like that. So he resisted that, and then he runs away. And when he runs away and he leaves the clothing in her hand, she calls on the guards and she says, "Look, they brought this Hebrew kid here." So she's very demeaning to him because she feels hurt. And of course, when a woman is hurt, um, they can she can do all kinds of things, and that's why it's not good to hurt women, anybody really. But she felt very hurt, and she decided to take revenge and to accuse Joseph that he came and tried to rape her, tried to be with her. And of course, she tells her husband, and her husband, as a result, puts him in jail. But he puts him in jail where the king's slaves or servants are put. So this is very interesting because one of the ideas is that maybe her husband, Potiphar, knew what was really going on. He had to respect his wife and put Joseph away, but he knew that the fault is with his wife. Maybe he knew that she came on to him. Because otherwise, think about it. If he really thought that Joseph was in fault here, he would have just killed him. I mean, in those days, I mean, there was nothing that would be preventing him from just executing him. He's a slave after all, a Hebrew slave. He hasn't doesn't have anybody behind him. So he's put not even in a regular jail, but the upscale jail. So, so in a sense, it was an act of a symbol, a symbol act of making sure that Joseph is away and punishing him at least for as a for public as the public notice. So he's put in jail, and then one day, two of the ministers of Pharaoh come to the same jail, and they're very upset, of course. And Joseph asked them what's wrong, and they said, "We both had a dream." And one tells him that they both tell him the dreams. And one says, I had the cupbearer says, I had a dream that I have the I put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, and he drinks from the cup. And Joseph says, well, in 3 days, but he says something very important before that. He said that every dream um, is interpreted here or there, but really is God is the interpreter of the dream. Now it has two levels here of the interpretation of the dream. One is that someone can interpret it for you or the way you interpret it. So those two levels are both God's hand in the interpretation. God's interpretation, when the way you see the dream, if you saw that you are giving God the cup to Pharaoh, so Joseph says to him, in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to reinstate you in to your old position, meaning the investigation will happen, and you will be found that you were honest, and he will reinstate you. We don't know what happened, why these two ministers ended up in jail, but probably something happened. Maybe something was missing in the there was a someone defrauded Pharaoh, and he wasn't sure who it was. So one was the baker and one was the cupbearer. So the two people who were the closest to him. So only one of them could have done it. And then the other one, when he saw that the Joseph interpret the dream, he tells the story too, and uh, he tells Joseph, "I had the dream that the bread basket was on my head, and the birds were eating from it." And Joseph says to him, "In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to hang you, to take your head off." So, and that's actually what happened. And the parasha ends with the fact that the cupbearer goes out and goes back to his old position next to Pharaoh, and Joseph asks the cupbearer to speak to Pharaoh in his behalf, to release him, to give him pardon, that he was not at fault, that he was not guilty. And the cupbearer does not remember him and forgets him. And then next week, it says after 2 years, exactly 2 years later, Pharaoh had the dream. So next week, we're going to talk about Pharaoh's dream and how then Joseph is brought out of the pit to solve the dream and, of course, becomes the viceroy of Pharaoh. But the idea of the dreams from the beginning, we begin this story, the parasha, with dreams that Joseph has his dreams about the earth and heaven, the sheaves and the stars, and they all bow down to him. And so he sees in his mind's eye that he will be a very prominent person one day. And of course, it's not yet fulfilled, but it will be fulfilled in a few verses later. And this parasha ends with a dream, with dreams of others who he interprets. In conclusion, the message that the parasha conveys here, as we said from the beginning, it's the basic theological message that God is in charge, that God will bring you somehow, as I learned from my from Father Roy, from my colleague. He said, God writes straight with crooked lines. So somehow you will get to where God wants you to be, but you may go through ups and downs, through rounds about, but you will get to where God wants you to be. So that's one way to see the hand of God and the way that God is in charge. And then the dreams themselves that are interpreted in the beginning, Joseph doesn't say, God told me that this is the interpretation. He just tells the story. He doesn't interpret the dreams. But at the end, with the dreams of the servant of the ministers of Pharaoh, he tells them ahead of time. God solves dreams. It's not me. I'm just maybe going to be the conduit to it. I'm going to be the interpreter. But what I say, it's really God's interpretation. Why? Because you said it yourself. The cupbearer saw that he returns the cup to Pharaoh. So in his mind, whether it's a dream is a prophecy, or just a mental of the subconscious that comes to the surface of what happens to it, or what we fill our mind with, either way, his thoughts were positive, and he knew that in his heart that he was innocent. So he, in a sense, was his own witness. And then the other minister um, saw the basket, the bread basket on his head when birds were eating from it, which means that it was something about that he was not providing for Pharaoh. It was the bread of Pharaoh that somebody else was eating. So he again was his own witness that says, "I am guilty. The guilt is on literally on my head." So in Hebrew, there's a phrase that the guilty party has the burning hat is on the guilty party. So and then finally to wrap this whole thing with the theology is that there is a measure for measure here, that we have to, everything we put out, we get back. And even Joseph had to learn something of to go through a full circle to start by saying, I'm in the center, my sheaf is in the center. I am the star that all the other stars and the luminaries bow down to me, to be humbled at the end to say God is in the center. And that really is all the theology, all the journey that we're here to go through. From eating from the tree of knowledge to say it's about us, to try to eat from the tree of life, to say God is the tree of life. He's in the center and we are fed by him. Shabbat Shalom.